Good morning. Vanessa from Apple Patch. Okay, we are up to block 15, week 8. And this is going to be your first block for this week. It's called the letter X, I suppose because there's lots of X's. Now, in your instructions, you will get 2 methods for making the quarter square triangle units. You can cut individual pieces. So your block, when it's laid out, will look... Let me zoom out a little bit. Zoom out, zoom out, zoom out. There we go. Will look like this. So these are all individual pieces. And you will have some triangles left because there's a center one and you're only using 2 triangles out of the square you cut. The other method is to make your quarter square triangle units using the 2 at once method. There may be an official name for it, but that's what I'm calling it. So I'm just going to move the camera back over, hopefully not make anyone sick. There we go. So here's a quarter square triangle unit. This is just one out of sample fabric. Here is one that I'll be doing for my Paul and Adelstrom version. So the make 2 at once method. First thing you're going to do is cut a pair of squares out of each colour, and these are called hourglass blocks because they look like, you know, an hourglass. And you're going to make 2 units that look like this. So this is where we pair up the 2 squares, draw one diagonal line, and sew a 1/4 inch on either side of the line. What you're going to do then is we're going to put these right sides together, and the colours have to be diagonally opposite each other. Hang on, I'm just going to pair them up. And the thing that we're really looking for is when I peel that back to halfway, that is where we want the seam matching. Hopefully the outsides of your squares should match as well. Now you can either press these open like I've done, or you can press to the side and you press to the darker fabric, and then your seam will nest. They'll sort of butt up against each other down the length of the seam. So once you've done that, grab some pins. You'll pin it together, and you're making, again, as you're pinning it, just make sure those seams butt up together there. The next thing I'm going to do, I'll just move these out of the way. Now, you can actually draw the line before you pin them together. It does make it a little bit easier because the pins get in the way. I'm going to draw a line in the opposite direction to the seam, so perpendicular to my seam. So again, I'll just make sure those seams are matching right in the middle there. Ow, 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 just stabbed myself. And then I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch down either side of that line. And this is what you will get. So you'll get, there's my pencil line, and a 1/4 inch either side. Now, when I peel this back, here is 1/4 square triangle unit. When I open up this side, there's the other 1/4 square triangle unit, which is why we call it making 2 at once. So all I need to do now is cut down that line, open it up, press the seams, and I've got 2 quarter square triangle units. So it's doing the same thing as we effectively do when we cut them apart and sew them back together. It's just that in this case, we're sewing first and then cutting apart. So that gives you the hourglass block where the 2 squares or 2 triangles are opposite each other, like that. Now, you can make these oversized, and in the instructions I give you the measurements for doing that. That does mean though that when you come to trim them back, you have to trim back on all 4 sides, because you need to make sure that the corner of your square, oops, it's out of camera, the corner of your square goes through that seam. So the point of your square is going through the seam. So in this case, you have to trim all 4 sides. That is, of course, it is the more accurate method. If you cut them to the exact size, then I recommend when you sew your 1/4 inch seam down either side, that you sew it a scant 1/4 inch. So sew it a little bit skinnier, so that when you open this up, this does measure the correct measurement. And it's a good idea to open this up if you're using the exact size fabric. Pop your ruler on it and actually make sure it comes to the right size before you cut it apart. Because it just makes it easier if you've got to unpick if you haven't already cut it apart, if you do need to adjust the seam. Okay, so that's making 2 at once. For the next block, which is curiously named the unnamed block, because I've forgotten to name it. To me, it looks like a star. We're also doing 1/4 square triangle units. 2 sides are the same colour and 2 opposite each other are different. So you've got a couple of ways of doing this. First one I'm going to mention is last week, you had some triangles left over from one of the blocks. So what you can do, I'm just going to zoom the camera around. There we go. This block, I have used my 8 leftover triangles in the corners of these 1/4 square triangles. Now that means each of the units end up having different fabrics in them, but that uses them up. But now, of course, I've had to cut everything else individually. You can also do it using, instead of the make 2 at once, it's the make 4 at once method, which is what makes these little guys here. So you would cut 2 squares of, let's call it the background fabric. In this case, on your pattern is the yellow. To making these units, you'd cut 1 square of a colour and 1 square of a colour. Okay, you're then going to pair up a background with a colour, draw a diagonal line, sew on either side and cut it apart, and you'll get 2 of these. And you're going to do the same with your other background colour square and your other colour. Sew them together with 1 diagonal line, cut them apart. So you'll end up with 2 each of these. Then when we pair them up so that the background colour, the yellow colour on the pattern, are opposite each other. And we're going to do this exact same as we did with these versions. we're going to match them up so that the seams match up, particularly through the center. Draw a line across perpendicular to our seam, so 1/4 inch either side of that, and that will give you 2 of these plus another 2. Because it will make 4 at once. So this is all the fabric from cutting 1 square of my 2 colours and 2 squares of my background fabric. So obviously you'll be doubling that to make your block. Okay, so I really like this method of making them, of making hourglass blocks. Especially, yes, I do oversize them and I trim back because I do like a bit of accuracy. And normally I love pressing seams open. To make these, if you do press to the side, it does help with butting them up together along the length of the seam. Okay, now what else have I got to show you? I'm going to just move the camera over a little bit. Hopefully now I have got this in shot. Okay, so this is fabric from my Paul and Adelstrom version, and I want to use a stripe that's going to run all the way down through. So how am I going to do that? Now this is not an even stripe, but it is a fun stripe. So I have got 2 triangles cut that will be my triangles here, and there's the other 2 that are leftovers. So I've cut those. And I've also cut the blue squares, that will sit either side of here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this square here from the top of my fabric. And I have cut this strip of fabric at 4 1/4 inches. But to cut the square, get my ruler around the right way, it needs to be 3 1/2 inches, but that needs to be centered down the middle. So first thing I'm going to do is just cut 3 1/2 inches. And then what is half of 3 1/2? The easiest way to do this actually is to simply press my piece of fabric in half. Maybe a little bit harder. And then I'm going to measure 1 3/4 on either side of that. Okay, so that means now I have centered these stripes. Now I'm going to cut my square for my 1/4 square triangle. A ruler so I can cut the diagonal. Now in this case I have to cut these the exact size. Okay, so now I can remove those 2 triangles, which I can use for something else. These two triangles will go in, and I can cut another 3.5 inch square for the other side. And when I sew this together, my stripes will run all the way down through. So don't be afraid of stripes. Now the other one I've got to show you here that I haven't sewn up yet is my other Paula Nagelstrom version. Whoops. And I've fussy cut these parts here, so hopefully it's going to look pretty funky when it is all sewn together. So because I've fussy cut, obviously I have had to cut individual pieces. Okay, it is time for me to say goodbye. Hopefully I'll get the notes out to you this morning, because I've got a class coming in at 10 o'clock, some ladies coming in for some lessons. So it is now 9:25. Let's see how I go. Okay, bye.